Ibrahim Traore is a name that's been making waves across the African continent. This young leader, who took over in September 2022, has been shaking things up, and not everyone is comfortable with it. In January 2023, he made a surprising announcement. He was officially severing ties with France, their former colonial ruler, and one of the last remnants of that colonial past. He's also forging new alliances, strengthening ties with Russia, and even inviting Chinese companies to invest in his country. What's driving this bold move? Is it a genuine desire for change, or a well-calculated strategy for power? And how is the international community reacting to the shift? Well, let's dive in and find out. Traore's actions have been nothing short of a whirlwind. Since he came to power, he's been boldly reshaping Burkina Faso's identity. One of his most significant actions was severing diplomatic ties with France. Now, why would he do such a thing? You might be wondering, considering France's historical influence in the region. But here's the thing. For many citizens of Burkina Faso, the relationship with France was more of a burden than an asset. They saw it as an unfair dynamic where France had a disproportionate amount of power and influence. It was a sentiment that Traore tapped into when he came to power. He understood the frustration of his people and used it to propel his agenda. But his decision didn't stop there. He went further by expelling the French ambassador and recalling Burkina Faso's ambassador from Paris. It was a clear statement of intent. Traore meant business, and he wasn't going to be deterred by anyone. Now, you might be thinking, what about the economic implications? After all, isn't Burkina Faso heavily dependent on France for trade and investment? Well, that's a valid point. But Traore is also exploring other options. He's looking to diversify the economy and reduce the dependence on a single partner. And this brings us to the next big question. Where is Traore heading? What kind of relationships is he building that could potentially rival those with France? Well, let's start with Russia. In February 2023, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov paid a surprise visit to Burkina Faso. It was a significant event, marking the first time a Russian foreign minister had visited the country in over 40 years. During his visit, he held high-level meetings with Traore and other officials. And what did they discuss? You might ask security, trade, and investment. Basically the building blocks of a strong relationship between two nations. But that's not all. Traore is also looking to strengthen ties with China. In March 2023, he made a significant announcement. He invited Chinese companies to invest in his country's mining sector. Specifically, he was interested in developing two major projects, the gold mine in the south and the manganese mine in the north. Now, why China? You might be curious. Well, here's the thing. China has been a major player in Africa in recent years. It's invested billions of dollars in infrastructure projects, helping African countries build roads, railways, and airports. And let's not forget about trade. China is now Africa's biggest trading partner. So when Traore extended the invitation to Chinese companies, he was tapping into a huge potential. But not everyone is happy about this new direction. Some see it as a betrayal of sorts, a rejection of the West for a partnership with the East. But Traore seems unfazed by the criticism. He's forging ahead with his plans, confident that he's doing what's best for his country. Now, you might be wondering, what's driving Traore's bold moves? What's the ideology that's shaping his actions and policies? Well, it's a mix of pragmatism and populism. Pragmatism in the sense that Traore is focused on what works, on what brings tangible results for his country. He's not afraid to experiment, to try new things, and to make tough decisions. Populism, on the other hand, is evident in his connection with the people. Traore understands the frustrations of the average Burkinabé, the challenges they face, and the change they want. He's tapped into that sentiment and used it as a force multiplier, amplifying the impact of his policies. But let's talk about something else that sets Traore apart: his leadership style. He's a charismatic leader, someone who can inspire and mobilize the people. He's also decisive and unafraid to take risks. These qualities are evident in everything from his economic policies to his foreign relations. In a continent where the average leader tends to cling to power for as long as possible, Traore stands out. He's already made it clear that he won't seek a second term. This might seem surprising, but it's a testament to his commitment to democracy and his trust in the people. Traore believes in the power of the Burkinabé, and he wants to ensure that they have the opportunity to choose their own leaders. It's a bold move that will undoubtedly shape the future of Burkina Faso. But while Traore is making waves in Burkina Faso, the rest of Africa is taking notice. His actions are seen as a breath of fresh air, a challenge to the status quo. It's no surprise that he's being watched closely by both citizens and leaders alike. So what does the future hold for Burkina Faso under Traore's leadership? Well, only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, the country is at a crossroads. It's a moment of great opportunity, but also of great risk. Traore has set his sights on a new future for Burkina Faso, a future that's free from colonial ties and open to new partnerships. It's a bold vision that could either lead to great success or significant challenges. Now, we all know that Africa is a continent full of potential. It has some of the fastest growing economies in the world, a booming population, and a wealth of natural resources. But it's also a continent that's grappling with a number of challenges, from poverty and inequality to corruption and conflict. Against this backdrop, Traore's leadership in Burkina Faso stands out. He's taken bold steps to address these challenges, from diversifying the economy to investing in education and healthcare. But let's not forget about the role of the international community. As Traore continues to forge new alliances as he strengthens ties with countries like Russia and China, he'll need the support of the international community. Traore's journey is one that many African leaders could learn from. He's showing that with strong leadership, with a clear vision and a commitment to the people, Africa can indeed become a powerhouse on the global stage. However, it's also important to recognize the challenges that Traore faces. He's operating in a complex web of global politics, where every decision he makes could have far-reaching consequences. Traore's leadership is being tested like never before. But if he can navigate these challenges successfully, he could very well go down in history as one of Africa's greatest leaders. So let's continue to watch him closely. Let's see how he shapes the future of Burkina Faso, and ultimately, how he leaves his mark on Africa. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think of Ibrahim Traore's leadership? Do you see it as a model for other African countries? Or do you think the challenges are just too great? Either way, let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Africa. And until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and above all, stay hopeful for the future of our great continent. A very big thanks for being in touch with us. Let's move to the next segment, 3 and 4. Russia has just been named as Burkina Faso's new strategic ally. So what does this mean for the region? And how is it that Russia has become such an important country for the Sahel region in general? I'm a U.S. Army combat veteran. It's March 2024. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, we have to take a look at the news from yesterday, where Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov traveled to Burkina Faso to formally establish a Russian embassy there. Now, this is kind of a big deal, because establishing an embassy indicates that this is going to be a permanent diplomatic mission. And for Russia, they have not had a formal diplomatic mission in this country before now. So this is kind of a big step. But even bigger than that is that Burkina Faso considers Russia to be their key strategic ally. And that's according to the interim president of the country, Captain Ibrahim Traore. He said, "Our vision is based on several pillars, among them defense and security. We are convinced that the security of our countries can only be achieved with the help of our allies. Russia is our main ally and partner. Now, that's pretty significant because Burkina Faso has long considered itself allied with France. They were part of the French military alliance, the G5 Sahel, alongside Mali, Mauritania, Chad, and Niger. But all those countries except for Burkina Faso have since severed those ties with France, which is interesting. Traore went on to say, "We need to diversify our partnerships and no longer depend on just one ally. We must also build new forms of cooperation." So clearly, he's saying that, yeah, France was an ally, but it's time to move on from that form of cooperation and instead work with Russia. And if you remember, back in January, I did a video about the Sahel Summit, which was held in Algeria, where many of the leaders of these Sahelian nations met and called for foreign troops, both French and American, to leave their countries. They wanted to establish sovereignty over their territorial affairs, and to do that, they needed their military forces to be able to defend themselves. And so they're turning to Russia because Russia is assisting them in building up their military capabilities. And this assistance goes beyond just sort of the typical military aid that you would see other countries getting. For instance, Burkina Faso and Russia have signed a cooperation agreement that covers military education. And when I say military education, I don't mean sending a couple of guys over to teach marksmanship or tactics. I'm talking about fully training entire battalions. The agreement includes training 3 infantry battalion tactical groups and 2 artillery regiments. That's a lot of troops. Now for context, the total defense budget of Burkina Faso is around $283 million. The United States spends almost $900 million a year just on Ukraine's military education and training. And so clearly, Russia is investing heavily here to build up these military forces. In addition to that, we're also cooperating on joint exercises. Burkina Faso will participate in the African-Russian military drills later this year. And then finally, they're also working together on the arms trade. Burkina Faso has purchased attack drones, attack helicopters, and armored personnel carriers from Russia. So clearly, there's a full spectrum of this military cooperation. And again, this is significant because it indicates that Burkina Faso wants to build up its defense forces to the point where they could potentially defend the entire country. Maybe even conduct offensive operations against insurgents and terrorists within the country. You might recall that just last month, the capital of Burkina Faso came under attack by militants. And this highlights a real problem that Burkina Faso faces, which is that they have a lot of territory, but relatively few troops to cover it. According to some reports, they may only have around 10,000 troops, but that's across an area the size of France, which is just massive. There's no way that they can effectively defend their borders without some outside assistance. And this is what Russia is hoping to fill. Now, this partnership is still pretty new. As I mentioned, Russia just opened its embassy, but it's clear that Russia has been cultivating relationships with these Sahel nations for quite some time now. Back in 2021, when Paul-Henri Damiba led a coup to overthrow the government of Burkina Faso, he immediately went out and made a bunch of pro-Russian statements. So this relationship between Russia and this nation goes back at least that far, and it is a reflection of a growing trend throughout Africa. If you look at Wagner's activities, they're involved in at least 30 African countries. And now Russia has established an embassy in Burkina Faso. They're doing joint military exercises. They're providing military education. This is a major shift in the political landscape of Africa, and particularly of the Sahel region. And frankly, it represents a real loss for France, which has long dominated this region. Now, in reality, it's probably more accurate to say that it's not so much a loss for France as it is a failure of French leadership. Because if you look at what's happening in Mali, you see this narrative that France is supporting the corrupt government in Bamako, while the Tuareg rebels in the north are fighting for independence and autonomy. And so if you're a member of the Tuareg community, it makes sense why you might want to align yourself with Russia. But if you look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, you see this narrative that France is supporting the authoritarian government in Ouagadougou, while the various insurgent and terrorist groups that are predominantly made up of ethnic minorities are rising against the central government. And so it makes perfect sense that these groups would want to align themselves with Russia. And so this isn't necessarily a case of Russia being this great power that's swooping in and converting everybody to their side. It's more of a case of Russia being a convenient ally for these countries and these groups that feel abandoned by France. And it's a commentary on France's leadership in this region. Ultimately, I think the biggest lesson for the US here is not to view Russia as a singular adversary. Too often, we tend to see Russia as this monolithic entity, and we forget that it is a collection of regions. And each of those regions has its interests and its perspectives. And it may very well be that in the future, we find ourselves working with Russia to address transnational issues like terrorism and extremism. So keep that in mind. Just because today we see Russia as an adversary does not mean that tomorrow we couldn't be working together. Cooperation is not always easy, but it is always possible. Other than that, guys, that is all I had. Thank you so much to everybody, especially to our Colonel tier members. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members. Thanks to all the members. I couldn't do this without you guys. And you can check out the links down below. And I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers. Segments 5 and 6. While the West is busy fanning the flames of war in Ukraine, there are several African countries that are forging closer ties with Russia. One such country is Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation in West Africa. In this episode of One-on-One, we have with us the ambassador of Burkina Faso to Russia, who will be sharing his thoughts on various issues, including how his country is strengthening trade and technological ties with Russia. Welcome to the show, Ambassador. Thank you for being here today. It's an honor to be here, and thank you very much for having me. Let's start with your country's name. What does it mean? The name Burkina Faso means land of the incorruptible. It derives from two major indigenous groups, the Mosses and the Bafulas. Burkina means land, and Faso means people. So put together, it means the land of the incorruptible, which has a very nice ring to it. You assumed your duties as ambassador in September last year, 2022. What has kept you busy so far? My first mission, like any other ambassador, is to contribute to the development of relations between our two countries, the Russian Federation and my country, Burkina Faso. In that respect, I think I've been able to make some progress. We started with strengthening our bilateral cooperation in the political domain. Then we also moved into economics, culture, and science. I think, if I may, I'm allowed to say that we have made some progress so far, and I hope that in the coming months, we'll be able to see more developments in these areas. What is the volume of trade between Burkina Faso and Russia at the moment? Unfortunately, it is very low, but there is potential for growth. Last year, the trade volume was approximately $30 million. There's a lot of potential for increasing this trade volume. Our two presidents are committed to seeing this figure grow exponentially. What are the main exports of Burkina Faso to Russia? We export mainly gold and manganese ore. So, what are Burkina Faso's main imports from Russia? At the moment, we import fuel and fertilizers. We're hoping that this year we'll be able to import some wheat as well. Your country's president, Paul-Henri Damiba, came to power in a military coup last year. How would you describe the current state of democracy in Burkina Faso? Let me say that Burkina Faso is a country where there is a transition period. There's been a process ongoing since 2014. I think the people of Burkina Faso just want a better future for themselves. They want to be sure that the institutions function well. They want to see good governance. They want to see social services improve. And they want to see the security situation get better. Do you think sanctions against Russia are affecting developing countries more than they are affecting Russia itself? Absolutely. You know, when you impose sanctions on a country, you always have to take into consideration the impact on the rest of the world, especially the developing countries. This is because these countries depend on various inputs from different nations, including the one that is sanctioned. And therefore, when you sanction a country, you should also think about the rest of the world. That is why I think that the best solution is always to seek a peaceful resolution to conflicts, rather than resorting to sanctions, which ultimately affect the whole world. Do you think the current standoff over Ukraine will escalate into a larger conflict involving NATO and Russia? Well, I sincerely hope not. As I said earlier, I think the best way out of this crisis in Ukraine would be a peaceful solution. And I think the sooner we find a peaceful solution, the better it will be not only for the people of Ukraine, but also for the rest of the world. Is there a possibility of Burkina Faso sending troops to participate in the peacekeeping operation in Donbass? No, absolutely not. There's no question about that. What efforts is Burkina Faso making to end the hostilities in Libya? Well, we are making every effort possible. As a member of the African Union, we are deeply concerned about the situation in Libya. It's a member state of the African Union, and we want to see peace return to Libya. We are part of the efforts led by the African Union and ECOWAS to bring peace to Libya. Many experts believe that the African continent has enormous potential to become the world's next economic powerhouse. How can Russia help unlock this potential? Well, there are many ways in which Russia can help Africa. For example, through the BRICS mechanism. If you look at the new development bank, which is the BRICS Bank, it is helping fund infrastructure projects across the continent. Some roads, schools, and hospitals have been built in Africa thanks to funding from the BRICS Bank. Another way in which Russia can help Africa is through technology. Burkina Faso and Russia discussed the need for African countries to join the BRICS alliance. President Putin also expressed his support for African countries to join the BRICS alliance. What role do you think the BRICS Bank can play in financing African development projects? The new development bank has a very important role to play. Its main objective is to mobilize resources for infrastructure and other productive sectors in developing countries, in particular, those that are members of the BRICS. And that's a big contribution because these are countries that often don't have access to funding for development projects. So the BRICS Bank is really helping to fill this gap. How can Russia and Burkina Faso strengthen their cooperation in the area of education and science? We have a lot of potential for cooperation in this area. For example, Burkina Faso has a number of universities that could benefit from Russian expertise in science and technology. Additionally, there are many scholarships available for African students to study in Russia. We're talking about over 30,000 scholarships. So there is a lot of potential for cooperation in education and science between our two countries. What kind of Russian books can we expect to see from the embassy library? I think you can expect to see books on Russian history, culture, language, and literature. We also have some books on Russian President Vladimir Putin and the development of Russia as a country. Which Russian authors would you recommend for those who want to learn more about Russia? I think you should start with Leo Tolstoy. He is considered one of the greatest writers of all time. His books, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, are must-reads. Then you can move on to Fyodor Dostoevsky, who is another great Russian author. His books explore themes of good and evil, faith and doubt, and the human condition. Some of his most famous works include Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. Of course, we cannot forget Anton Chekhov, who is a master of the short story. His works are known for their subtle characterization and understated humor. Some of his most famous stories include The Lady with the Dog and The Death of a Government Clerk. If you were to organize an exhibition at the embassy showcasing Russian culture, what 3 items would you display? I think I would display a traditional Russian nesting doll, a samovar, which is a traditional Russian tea-making vessel, and an icon, which is a traditional Russian hand-painted religious painting. What message would you like to convey to the people of Russia about Burkina Faso? I would like to invite them to visit my beautiful country. It's a land of great natural beauty with a rich culture and warm people. I think they will enjoy visiting Burkina Faso. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for your kind words about Burkina Faso. And once again, thank you for being here today. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Hello, folks. This is your host. And if you'd like to send us your comments or suggestions, you can do so through the provided email. And if you'd like to be among our subscribers, click on the subscribe button and never miss any of our latest videos.